DevelopSec, Developing Security Awareness with James Jardine, brought to you by Jardine Software. Hi, and welcome to episode 10 of the DevelopSec podcast. I'm James Jardine, and today I want to talk about a pretty cool, updated yet new tool from Microsoft for developers regarding threat modeling. And if you're not doing threat modeling, it really is a great way to be able to go in and analyze your project and start to understand what threats are out there for your application, and then ideas on how you can start mitigating those. So what it does is it basically creates this project plan of, hey, we've got this application, and here's our surface area, here's our inputs, here's our outputs, here's where we transform data, here's the processes that we touch. There's all this information that gets stored into what we call a data flow diagram, which is one of the easier ways to do it, and that's how the threat modeling tool works. Is basically you kind of use UML to draw out this data flow diagram, and you can put in there boundaries. So between the client and the web server, there's a trust boundary there, because as a developer, I can't trust anything that comes from the client because we know how easy it is for us to manipulate that data. So that's a trust boundary. We may have a trust boundary between our servers and our databases or our data stores. Depending on if there's other applications that talk into there, can we really trust that data? And so you put all these actors onto the data flow diagram. And what's really cool about the threat modeling application, and they've had this for a while, I think the last release came out back in 2011 or so, and it required Visio to work to do the data flow diagramming. What's really cool now is it doesn't require Visio anymore. So now it's really a standalone product. It runs on Windows that can do everything. So as you develop these data flow diagrams, it automatically does threat generation for you based on the objects and actors that you've included into your system. So if you've got a trust boundary and you've got data going from one side to the other, it automatically looks at, well, what kind of threats commonly happen here? Let me go ahead and just create these out. And it automatically validates your data flow diagram as you're doing it. And what I mean by validate it is that if you've got some data store that's just sitting on there, but there's no data flow to it, it'll let you know that, right? Because if there's a data store that nothing connects to, well, obviously that's not much of a threat. But it also doesn't really do anything. So it prompts you up and tells you if there's any errors, like, hey, you should have a data flow going from here to there, or you should have a boundary here maybe. And as it's doing that, it's also going in and generating these threats. So, I might throw in, the client and the web server, and maybe it starts listing out possible threats that I have going on there. And so it's really cool too, because they've added a whole bunch of stencils. Before, it was really kind of limited to your process, your user or actor, a data store, data flow, trust boundary, and maybe one more. But now they've got a whole bunch. They've broken it down into process, external, store, flow, boundaries. So no longer do we have just one or two boundaries. There's a couple different types of boundaries that we can have. So that kind of makes it cool that, we're expanding out and saying, look, everything doesn't fit into one little category. We also have more things out there that we need to think about. So as I mentioned, you drop stuff on to these, the flow of this, and I'm going to put a video out showing how to walk through this because it's very simple to do. And you can go in and connect. Oh, one of the cool things too is with the flow, before it was just a data flow. Now you can actually check whether it's HTTP, HTTPS, if it's IPsec, right? How is that data actually flowing? And then you can start seeing really what kind of issues you have going on out there. So as you simply put this together, it just really starts to kind of throw these things in, and then you can start looking at, well, what type of vulnerabilities do I possibly have with my data flow? What do I need to think about as data goes from the browser up to the server? we use the stride methodology, and I'll put some notes on this inside the show notes regarding this. But is there any chance for snooping data or data integrity issues or anything like that? We want to make sure that those are the things that we're focused on, so that way we can actually go in here and really start to analyze our system. And as it starts listing out automatically some of the values, right, that we're seeing of, oh, hey, here's a current threat, here's another threat, we can go in there and we create notes about these threats. We can, go in and say, okay, so I have an unsecure connection between my browser and my server. So what am I going to do to mitigate that so that way people can't intercept that traffic? Well, I'm going to implement some sort of secured channel, and we can go in there and put in, I'm going to use HTTPS because it's between the browser and the client, browser and the server. But if it was server to server on the back end, maybe we have IPsec there. But we're analyzing, hey, here's where the weak points are, and here's how we're going to mitigate them. And if we do this before we build the application, and I know most people don't, which you can do it afterwards too, because the threat models are great. They make great living documents of basically a playbook of how our application works. But you build it up beforehand, and when you go to build the system, you've already got a whole set of requirements that are already there. That you need HTTPS connection, that you need IPsec between these two bridges. And now that you've got this set of this kind of playbook of, hey, these are security features that we're going to put in, these controls that are going to exist, we can hand that to QA and figure out a way to verify this. And let's test to make sure that if we require a secure connection between the browser and the server, is there a way for me to change that and say, I just want to go through port 80. Let me just do HTTP and let me see if it works. And that's something easy that somebody in QA can go in there and test. Now, we think about storing data, stuff like that, may not be as easy if they don't have access to the database. But it still gives us a checklist as developers, a way to be able to go in there and see the data, see what our controls are, and then verify they're in place, rather than just saying, well, here's some data, and usually we do this to it. Here we've got sort of this written plan that this is what we're going to do. We're going to use SSL. We're going to use IPsec between these two, and we got to make sure that they're implemented. We can check it off. As I mentioned, it makes a pretty cool playbook because you can actually save these out. You can print a report. You can save it out in report format, but you build this up for your application, and it contains much more than just a data flow diagram. It's got things like the application name, the technology that's being used, a description of the application. There's lots of information, all the third-party components or external components that are used. So if there's a DLL that it requires, right, we list those out so that we know, hey, these are the dependencies that our application has. So say you bring somebody new into your organization, a new developer. You can give them this threat model and let them look through it. And it's basically documentation. Hey, here's the type of libraries we use. Here's the way we mitigate the threats. Here's how we look at threats, because it's very easy to then be able to go in and see and say, okay, I see what we're doing here. I see how you guys do your stuff. And when stuff comes out like Heartbleed, I know nobody's heard of that before, but right, Heartbleed has been all over the news. Something like that comes out, and it's like, hey, there's a vulnerability in OpenSSL. Well, how do we know if we're using OpenSSL? Right? Hopefully we know we're using it. But if we didn't off the top of our head, could we go back and look at our threat model and say, hey, one of our dependencies is OpenSSL? I could go either way on that one, since that's more of a server configuration. But that may be something that we have in there that we can store this, right? If there's other dependencies, some third-party controls, maybe using Infragistics. And I just use as an example. I don't know of any issues with those controls. I like those controls. But say you're using Infragistics controls. Well, what if a bug were to be found in those? Do you know which controls you're using, which version you're using? Same thing like Enterprise Library, another good example, right? Which versions are we using, and are we watching those versions to see, hey, are you end of life? Do you have vulnerabilities? And if any of those things pop up, do we know how to take care of them? But the threat model provides a great way to be able to identify this type of thing and know, hey, this is what our application does. I can't tell you how many times I've been at a company where something's going on and they want to add a new feature and it's a huge application. And they're like, oh, well, let's create this data store thing and let's put it out here so we can send files to it. And people go off and start generating this. And then you talk to somebody that's been working on the app for a long time and you tell them what you're doing, because obviously we're separated apart, right? Not everybody's working on the same piece of the application. And he's like, oh, yeah, we have a piece like that. It's located here. And here's the service to call it. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. So we were just about to spend time building this and we already have the piece. Right, so if you've got your whole application modeled out, and this is a high-level model, it's not down to the function level, it's not even really down to the DLL level. This is a high level, this is how data processes through our system. And we're recording where data transforms, where processes may change, right, the different actors, the data stores, but that's all we're doing. We're not getting down. This isn't a data flow as far as, hey, I'm making a flow chart for how my application works. This isn't CS 101, where we're writing a C program and our flowchart has to mimic every line of code that we're going to put in their system. This is high level, so we can easily look at it and see, oh, hey, we've got this data store out here and this is what it's used for. Let me go use it. So threat modeling provides much more than just what most people would think is the hassle of doing it, right? Because it does require some work, although with tools like the new threat modeling tool, it's not as bad because they make a lot of it a lot easier. And if you're new to threat modeling, the tool, I think, is a good way to go because it helps walk you through some of the issues and really kind of hold your hand versus a lot of people that do a lot of threat modeling may say, oh, well, I just use an Excel spreadsheet or I just do this. There's many different ways. I say in class all the time, threat modeling is your process. Whatever works for you, that's what you want to do. But if you haven't done it before, take some of the burden off and go out and use a tool that makes it real easy to just kind of drag and drop things and kind of lead you in the right direction for how to handle some of the questions you might have. Because I think the biggest barrier for me when people start to do threat modeling is that really it's kind of difficult to fully understand what you're doing. Everybody says, do threat modeling. But do I really know what I'm doing with threat modeling? Writing secure code has a small little bit in there about threat modeling. But I never feel like you come out really understanding. Now, if you're really looking to get deep into threat modeling, a book I just recently got written by Adam Shostak from Microsoft is Threat Modeling, Designing for Security. And although I haven't got a chance to go through a lot of it yet, it's definitely a good-sized book for talking about doing threat models. Again, Microsoft has been doing threat models for quite a long time, and they really stand behind the idea. So, hey, let's take the chance and get in. It does take a little bit of time to get up and going, but as you start doing it more, you'll get faster at it, and the benefit will truly outweigh the small amount of time lost trying to get up and going. So look out there for it. It is on Microsoft's site. You can do a search for the Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool 2014. Again, it doesn't rely on Visio anymore, which is awesome. So that way we don't have to worry about versions of Visio changing or having to go out and purchase Visio just so we can use the threat modeling tool. No reliance on Visio. Very wizard-like, I would say, but great project. So I'm glad to see that they updated it. There's plenty of other projects out there that I'd love to see more updates come out for. Sometimes we get a little concerned that we don't see updates, and then just out of nowhere, bam, here's a new update. It's like, oh, yes, this is awesome. Again, this one is awesome. So I'm planning on doing a video kind of walking through some of the process for it. I'm going to write a post about it, talking about it a little bit more. I'll include some show notes about where you can go get it. Also, the book for threat modeling by Adam Shostak. So you can check that out. It just came out. I actually had mine pre-ordered and just got it a few weeks ago. So definitely worth checking out if you're getting into doing any type of threat modeling. So that's it for today. Just a quick nonsense about threat modeling, I guess. Funny, I didn't even think it would last this long, but pretty much a full 15 minutes, which is great. Perfect. That's pretty much as long as I really want to go on these. And then next week we'll talk about some more issues. Maybe we'll talk some Heartbleed really what you should be doing about it. Maybe we're going to do it next week. Maybe we'll do it sooner than then. But that wraps it up. So thank you for listening. You can listen out at developsec.libsyn.com, or you can go out and find it on iTunes. And we'll be back again next week. You have been listening to the DevelopSec podcast with James Jardine. Follow us on Twitter at DevelopSec and visit our website at www.developsec.com for more episodes and information.